Lamport's 82 paper, it provides not just a name and basically the set of test cases that you have to deal with, and shows that certain cases, like just two generals, is not solvable if there is a malicious general, but it also puts an upper bound on the potential speed. And it's interesting because it's very, very slow. It's order n exponentiated to f plus 1. So it's really slow for the communication if you are looking at just the upper bound. But there are solutions to some of this, and there is a practical Byzantine fault tolerance paper that was published a few years later. The practical paper describes a way to do this, which is basically what's implemented in Bitcoin. And this is also used in a bunch of other systems that are not Bitcoin. Not just in blockchain cryptocurrency, but the Boeing 767 and 777 both use this practical Byzantine fault tolerance for their control systems. There is a group in India that has recently done this, very recently, that is using this basic principle for communicating between medical devices in hospitals. And the assumption is that you're communicating over a faulty network. IBM Hyperledger uses this. I'm not totally fond of IBM Hyperledger, but there are some applications out there like IBM Food Trust. Zocilla, another type, uses this, but it only does the proof of work every 100 blocks because proof of work is very expensive. Ripple uses a modified Byzantine fault tolerance solution. And MasterCards has managed to use it and get 5,000 transactions per second out of their system. So there are a bunch of different folks out there that have used this practical Byzantine fault tolerance. And there is certainly a need for people that understand it. The ugly details of this are that it is not a very fast protocol, although it can be a very reliable protocol under some really horrible cases. So we're going to take a look at how it works, because we're also going to talk about why Honey Badger is a much better system. But let's talk about multiple generals and consensus. 2 isn't enough, but it turns out that if you go through what they're talking about in Lamport's paper, that as long as you reach a level of n, where that's the number of generals, divided by 2 plus 1, so half plus 1 agreeing, that you can reach a good state of consensus. And this means that you can have failures that are half minus 1 failing in some fashion, or cheating, or lying. And that combination there gives you some bounds on terms of how much the network really has to have to work. And that half plus 1 is what we're going to see over and over in terms of these consensus algorithms. So if I have 5 generals, A through F, and those generals are going to send messages to each other, we'd like to minimize the number of messages. We'd also like to reach consensus. So there is one lead general that is going to send a message out to all the other generals that is either attack or delay. So he could send a variety of different messages, and I've got columns with different kinds of messages. But let's look at that first one where he sends attack, attack, delay, attack, attack to the other folks. Now, the fact that he sent to General C a delay message doesn't really adversely affect the working of the system, because yes, if we take 5 divided by 2, that's 2 plus 1 is 3, and you'll see that if they all respond to the 3 of them, at least respond as attack, we'll still reach a consensus, and that's what we will do. And how did he send a delay message out to General C? Well, maybe he sent a good message that was attack, because he sent attack to everybody. But maybe that message courier got interrupted by some man in the middle who changed the message. You know, I mean, he ran into a magician, stopped to see the magician. The magician slipped out his little message canister and slipped in a new message canister, and he doesn't even know that he sent the wrong message. So in terms of communication, having one leader send out the message solves a big part of the communication bandwidth problem. Now, we can rotate the leaders effectively, and when we rotate the leaders, provided that we don't do it in a malicious fashion, if it's all a set of nodes that are equal and we just randomly pick a leader, we can get good results. Now, every one of the people out there has to send back an acknowledgement that they received it, and then the leader has to send back the notice that, yes, I understood you acknowledged it, and therefore I am sending you back the result. Now, if you go through Lamport's paper, you'll find that he does this very nicely with an explanation where some of them are late, some of them don't do it on time, some of them miss the message, some of them misread the message, and it all will still work out, provided that you can just simply count the number of successes. So, there's the trivial case. There's only one general. 2 generals won't tolerate a traitor general if the leader says attack. 3 is the minimum solution where we can actually look at this working. And 5 is a much more realistic solution. There has been some research that shows that when you get up to 9 with a randomly picked leader, a slot leader at 9, and that you don't get any more security or any more reliability in these kind of things than if you had 9 nodes, provided that you always pick a random leader. And that picking of a random leader turns out to be really hard until you realize that there's a way to generate random numbers across the network. So anything above 9 doesn't get you anything, provided it's a random sample every single time. If it's not a random sample, then you have all sorts of other problems of malicious cooperation between the generals with some sort of a back-channel communication. So with the case of 3, let's talk about traitors, because traitors is, and how frequent they are, is really the thing that all the other communication failures will be taken care of. I mean, if you lose communication, it's no worse than a traitor, because the traitor is the malicious bad communication. Yes, I got your message to attack, and I'm sending back an acknowledgement, but then I don't attack. So these are the worst cases. And if you can get past that worst case, then the other cases just tend to kind of fall out of this entire process. So it turns out that any of these systems can tolerate up to 1/3 traitors. So if you have 3 nodes, you can tolerate 1 traitor. Okay? If you have 5 nodes, you can tolerate 2 traitors. Because as long as you can get to that point where you have half plus 1 that are agreeing, then the fact that these others don't perform properly doesn't make much difference. And if you look at it in terms of a practical thing in Ethereum, as of earlier today, there was 11,401 nodes. That means that 1/3 is 3,800 nodes, and at an average cost of about 18,000 per node, that's to be a successful trader in this system is going to require $70 million worth of hardware minimum, plus all the network connections and time to set it up, and setting up 3,800 different computers without anybody noticing is a lot. This is not something that just happens overnight. So if you have a large network, okay, it doesn't pay to be a trader. And all of these systems, although they are set up to prevent this, they also have inherent in them the fact that if it is expensive enough, okay, nobody will do it, which is the game theory side of this. It is not perfect by any means, but as long as you can get some communication through and you can get some acknowledgements, it will work. And how good is it at working? I have been unable to take an Ethereum node, even if it's detached from the network and it then later recovers and comes back onto the network, to actually fail. Does it produce unusual results because we've split up a network into two different pieces and we've got some sort of split network? Yeah, occasionally. But remember, the count that has the most always wins. So it recovers from those kind of things. Is it got a lot of communication going on? Yeah, it has a lot of communication going on. So that's all of your basic proof of authority, proof of stake, proof of work type solutions that are all based on we'll just communicate and we'll do the work and we'll communicate back. Now, is there a way to prevent traitorous nodes or to impinge upon their operation? And once you understand the basic communication behind the Byzantine fault tolerance, we can look at how Honey Badger solves some of these problems. Remember, in Honey Badger, the nodes themselves don't have access to the data because they're doing homomorphic encryption. Until we reach that threshold of half plus one nodes that have a solution to the encryption and can decrypt the data, which means they can't cheat on the data nearly as soon. It doesn't mean that it's completely proof from them cheating on the data or using some network latency to cheat on the data. But it does mean that they can't see it until we've already reached a consensus. And once we've reached a consensus, we all reach the consensus together. So unlike a message that you actually send it out to the general and they say, oh, he's saying attack now, but I don't actually have to do the attack until he receives the acknowledgement and I get back the results from that acknowledgement. Which means that I can do something in between. In Honey Badger, with threshold keys, nobody sees the result until everybody sees the result, which is a much better solution.